On the morning of June 6, 1944, before the sun had even appeared on the horizon, all of Nazi Germany was in a deep sleep. Yet that night was no ordinary night. The course of history was about to change, silently but irreversibly. In the freezing waters of the English Channel, through dense fog and darkness, thousands of ships glided like ghosts toward the French coast. The sound of their engines blended with the crashing waves, while tens of thousands of young soldiers waiting on the decks shared that strange silence where fear and courage intertwined. This was not merely a military landing operation. It was the greatest logistical miracle in human history and the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany. The story began years earlier, on June 22, 1941, when Nazi Germany launched Operation Barbarossa and attacked the Soviet Union. The war entered a truly global phase. On the endless steppes of the Eastern Front, millions were dying as the Red Army struggled with superhuman effort against the German war machine. Yet Joseph Stalin knew that this resistance alone would not be enough. Unless the pressure on the German army was eased, the collapse of the Soviet Union was only a matter of time. Messages sent from Moscow to Washington and London were clear, harsh, and urgent. If you want to stop the Germans, you must open another front in the West, through France. Otherwise, this war will be lost and Europe will be plunged into darkness forever. For American President Franklin D. Roosevelt and British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, this demand was not merely a warning but a necessity. It was obvious that Nazi Germany could not be defeated without setting foot on the European continent. Yet this decision carried with it an unprecedented military risk. Adolf Hitler had turned occupied France into a colossal fortress. Entering it could not be done casually or recklessly. Beginning in 1942, German engineering set to work constructing a massive defensive line stretching from the French coast to the icy fjords of northern Norway. This line was known as the Atlantic Wall, a name magnified by the power of propaganda. Reinforced concrete bunkers, thousands of mines, steel obstacles reaching into the sea, massive coastal guns, and machine gun nests designed to spew death. Hitler blindly believed this defense was impenetrable. Moreover, control of this vast system was given to Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the legendary Desert Fox, whose tactical brilliance in the North African deserts had made him famous. Unlike Hitler, Rommel understood the danger. Knowing the Allies' air superiority, he believed the only way to stop them was to destroy them on the beaches the moment they set foot on land. In Rommel's view, the outcome of the war would be decided in the first 24 hours, the day that would become known as the longest day. Meanwhile, Allied headquarters were engaged in an exhausting effort. Plans refined over months and even years. Intelligence reports and geographical analyses were laid out in detail. Potential landing areas were examined one by one. Brittany, the Cotentin Peninsula, Normandy, and Pas-de-Calais. Brittany and Cotentin were deemed too risky, as their geography could allow the Germans to trap and annihilate Allied forces. Pas-de-Calais, the closest point to Britain, seemed the logical choice. Precisely for that reason, the Germans had heavily fortified it with their strongest defenses and elite units. In the end, only one difficult but feasible option remained: Normandy, the place the Germans least expected. Normandy was a region where German defenses were relatively weaker, yet it still posed deadly risks with its steep cliffs, treacherous tides, and harsh terrain. For the Allies, this was a massive gamble. But to win the war, the dice had to be rolled. The operation was given a name under strict secrecy: Overlord. It would become the largest amphibious operation in history. Appointed as Supreme Commander of the Allied Expeditionary Force, American General Dwight D. Eisenhower carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. Command of the ground forces was entrusted to British General Bernard Montgomery. In the first phase of the plan, approximately 160,000 soldiers were to land simultaneously in France using thousands of ships, aircraft, and landing craft. If this initial assault succeeded, the number of troops brought to Europe in the following weeks would reach into the millions. Yet such a vast and complex operation could not be won by manpower and firepower alone. Nature also had to cooperate. Wind speed, wave height, cloud cover, and above all the tides and the phase of the moon were critical. Eisenhower was particularly insistent on a full moon, as pilots and paratroopers needed visibility for the nighttime airborne operations. The initial date for the landing was set for June 5, 1944. However, on the night of June 4th, everything began to go wrong in the English Channel. An unexpected storm, fierce winds, and low clouds made the operation impossible. Massive waves could swallow landing craft, and aircraft might not find their targets. A single mistake could mean thousands of soldiers drowning before ever reaching the shore. Eisenhower was facing the most difficult decision of his life. A delay risked exposing the plan. A cancellation meant months of waiting. In those tense moments, British Royal Air Force meteorological officer James Stagg identified a small window of hope on the charts. According to his analysis, the storm would briefly subside, and conditions on the morning of June 6th would be acceptable. At his headquarters in southern England, in a room thick with cigarette smoke, Eisenhower met his generals one final time and broke the silence with a historic phrase, "Let's go." The landing would not be postponed. It would take place on the morning of June 6th. This decision sealed the fate of millions. Eisenhower issued the order while carrying in his pocket a resignation note, written in advance, taking full responsibility should the operation fail. On the other side, the situation in the German camp was strikingly different. German meteorologists, working with limited data, predicted that the storm would continue. German command was convinced the Allies would never dare to attack in such terrible weather. This complacency led to relaxed defenses. Guard numbers were reduced, some officers were sent inland for exercises. Even Field Marshal Rommel had traveled to Germany to celebrate his wife's birthday. The German war machine was in a deep sleep, unaware of the approaching catastrophe. Meanwhile, the Allies were executing one of the most sophisticated and successful deception campaigns in history. Operation Fortitude. Months of fake radio traffic, false information spread by double agents, and phantom armies made of inflatable tanks and wooden aircraft blinded German intelligence. This imaginary force, supposedly commanded by General George Patton, appeared to be positioned opposite Pas-de-Calais. Hitler and his staff were so convinced that the main attack would come through the narrowest point of the channel that they would dismiss the Normandy landings as a mere diversion. On the night of June 5th to June 6th, under the cover of darkness in the English Channel, mine-sweeping ships silently cleared the way. Then, covering the horizon, the largest armada in human history began to move. More than 5,000 ships carrying hundreds of thousands of soldiers, thousands of tanks and vehicles advanced toward Normandy. And incredibly, German radar still failed to detect this colossal force. At 00:15, the sky roared with the sound of engines. More than 20,000 paratroopers from the American 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions and the British 6th Airborne Division jumped into the darkness. Their mission was to seize bridges behind the beaches, cut supply routes, and delay German reinforcements. Yet wind, anti-aircraft fire, and pilot stress scattered many units miles from their intended drop zones into swamps and fields. Units lost contact with one another, plans unraveled. But this chaos created an unexpected advantage. Small Allied groups appearing everywhere caused massive confusion within the German command. Unable to determine the scale or direction of the attack, German forces saw enemies behind every hedge and tree. As the clock struck 6:30 on the morning of June 6th, dawn was breaking. At Eisenhower's command, the gates of hell opened. Hundreds of warships unleashed their heavy guns on German positions. The sky lit up with fire. Then the ramps of the landing craft dropped, and thousands of soldiers plunged into the icy water. 5 beaches were targeted: Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juneau, and Sword. At Utah Beach, fortune favored the Allies. Strong currents pushed landing craft toward a less defended area, allowing American troops to establish a foothold with relatively fewer casualties. Just a few kilometers away, however, Omaha Beach became a nightmare. This stretch of coast, forever known as Bloody Omaha, saw the preliminary bombardment miss its targets almost entirely. German defenses remained largely intact, and soldiers were pinned down by the deadly fire of MG, 42 machine guns positioned on the high bluffs. Amphibious tanks sank beneath the waves, and soldiers were cut down on the open sand with nowhere to hide. The seawater turned red with blood. Yet against all odds, small groups led by courageous officers managed to breach the killing zones and climb the bluffs. At Pointe du Hoc, American Rangers scaled sheer cliffs with ropes to silence German gun batteries, a turning point in the battle. To the east, British and Canadian forces advanced on Gold, Juneau, and Sword beaches with the help of specially designed mine-clearing tanks. Despite facing heavy fire at Juneau Beach, Canadian troops achieved some of the most significant advances of the day. The Atlantic Wall was not collapsing easily, But it was beginning to crack. In Berlin, Hitler was not awakened until midday. When he finally received the reports, he refused to believe them. His generals argued that the Normandy landings were merely a diversion and that the real invasion would come at Calais, delaying the movement of panzer divisions. Under Allied air superiority, moving armored units in daylight would have been suicidal, yet not using them at all proved even more disastrous. This hesitation and the breakdown in the chain of command eliminated Germany's last chance to drive the Allies back into the sea. By the end of the day, the Allies had established a fragile but permanent foothold along the Normandy coast. Tens of thousands of soldiers now stood on French soil. The losses were horrific. Thousands of young men had died on those beaches in the prime of their lives. But the outcome was undeniable. A massive breach had been torn in Nazi Germany's fortress Europe. The Allies were now in Europe, and the road to Berlin lay open. The Normandy landings were not merely a military operation. They represented the ultimate test of logistics, intelligence, technology, and above all, human will. It was the greatest gamble the free world ever took against tyranny. And that gamble was won in the blood-soaked waters of June 6, 1944. That is why D-Day is not just a date on a calendar. It was the day an era ended, the day the price of freedom was paid in full, and the day the foundations of the modern world were laid. The world that awoke that morning was not the same world that went to sleep that night. If this video helped you understand D-Day better and broadened your perspective, don't forget to subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments. Remember, you are watching Historic Talks. Here, everything is presented with its full reality.